Hello, and welcome back to our lucky 13th live stream here on Ancient Egypt and the Bible, where we take your questions on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. And we're going to probably just get right into it, where we're just going to start taking your questions. And the rules are the same as always. We ask that if you are going to do, if you're not going to do a super chat, and of course super chats have priority. If you don't have if you're not going to do a super chat, please put a Q and a colon in front of your question so I know that it's directed to me personally, because I do scan the live chat for non-super chat questions. So I do take some non-super chat questions. So I also ask that you only post your question just once, so I can address it and know that I have either answered it or not. So with that said, I think things are already starting to pile up here. And with that, let's just get right into it. So I'm actually going to start off with a non-super chat. Ooh. Because I did see it earlier. Disciple of Christ said, I'm too broke to give any super chats today, or I would. Sorry, Dr. Falk. No need to apologize. We've all been there. I go there way too frequently. So I do understand, I do sympathize, and I get it. With that said, however, I am going to take your question. Were the Libyan pharaohs distinct in any kind of way? Can you give us a kind of general sense of what their reigns were like? Okay. During the time of the Libyan pharaohs, Egypt was in its third intermediate period. That means that they didn't really have control over, usually did not have control over the entire country of Egypt, or their reigns were fractured. It was the way that the sense they give us is that they're trying to imitate the Egyptian kings, but with a little bit of their own sort of cultural distinctiveness as well. So they're really trying to imitate the power and the glory of Egypt as they rule. I'll probably get a little bit. I'm planning on doing a video just on Shishak the First. And we'll get a lot more into that at that time, because one of the interesting things about Shishak is he is the first king, I believe it's of the 23rd dynasty. He's the first Libyan ruler, really. And he takes over after the fall of the 21st dynasty. So there's that sort of really marked difference here between Egyptian rule under Susanes II to Shishak I. So there's actually a lot of distinctions that go on there, but it's not so much cultural. It's very similar in a lot of ways to the ways things ran before. But what happens is that the Siamam line, or sorry, the Smendes line falls. Smendes line of kings falls, and the Libyans more or less just take over at the capital city of Tanis and start ruling Egypt from there. But unlike Egyptian rule, Libyan rule is much more of a tribal set of affiliations. Okay, it's much more tribal. Libyan society is extremely tribal, always has been. It still is to this day. Very tribal. The tribes run everything in Libya, and it's always been that way. So when the Libyan kings of Egypt take control, they're having to appease all sorts of other Libyan tribes that are sort of sharing the power. And sometimes this leads to fractured rule, where you have multiple Libyan dynasties ruling at the same time. So that just gives you a little glimpse of what Libyan rule was like. But I wanted to take this non-super chat because you've been a great supporter of this ministry, and I wanted to thank you for it. So with that said, let's start getting into the super chats. Okay. Now, our first super chat comes from Reginald O'Donoghue for £2. Thank you very much. Where was Cafter, and is it the same as Keftiu? Now, that's a subject that's often debated. The consensus at this point, the majority opinion at this point, I should say, is that they're not the same. Okay. Now, a lot of people, there's still some argumentation over what is Cafter. A lot of people think it's Crete. It's really hard to say. Keftiu was the Greek archipelago. Okay, so Keftiu is Greece. So that one's not so much up for debate. But it does appear that the two are different, and at least from, except for, they say, the casual, there is sort of an etymological similarity to the two words. However, the majority doesn't think that they're the same, but they are very, very close by as far as geographically they're concerned. So I hope that answers the question. But I'll take your second one here too, because it's also kind of fun. Have you seen the movie Gods of Egypt? And is it worse than Exodus Gods and Kings? I have not seen the movie Gods of Egypt, but Exodus Gods and Kings is pretty bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go out, find it, and watch it, because you've got me curious. Could this be possibly worse than Exodus Gods and Kings? I'll see. All right. Thank you very much for your super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Our second super chat from Tom Wanchik for $5. Thank you very much. You said you've taught a Bible study on the Book of Revelation, and the key was knowing the Old Testament symbols. Do you have any book recommendations on that topic? Actually, I do. Grant Osborne wrote a great commentary on the Book of Revelation. I don't think it's a cheap volume, but it's a very good volume. So I would highly recommend that. There was also a very recent Old Testament commentary on the New Testament, and I don't know who wrote it. I tried to look that up briefly, and I wasn't able to find the reference to it. It's very recent, so I haven't even checked it out, but I heard it's very, very good. I think D.A. Carson was involved with that project. So I know there's been a lot more resources on this particular angle that have come out in recent years. I just haven't caught up with it. You have to understand that when I taught this Bible study, it was back in 2015. So a lot of things happen in theology in 6 years. It's a lot can change. So new books come out all the time. And unless you're constantly buying books and reading them, it's really hard to keep track of all. And I know this particular area has received a lot of attention of late. So it would not surprise me if there are not more excellent resources out there. But I can recommend Grant Osborne's commentary. It's very good. So with that said, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Okay. Gizgo SBOL for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Will you ever release a solo album? Well, with God, all things are possible. Have I done solo work? Yes. Okay. Will I release a solo album? Well, we'll see. But thank you very much for the super chat. I do very much appreciate it. I do actually do. It is very much a hobby of making music is one I really, really enjoy. I really enjoy making music. So for me, it's one of those things if I had more time, I'd do a lot more of it. But right now, being a little cramped for time, it's difficult for me to produce an album. But very much appreciate the super chat. Thank you very much. And I love the question too. Okay. Another $5 super chat from Gizgo SBOL. Thank you very much. How much did it decline during the reign of Simeon? And if Egypt was weak, how did he manage to campaign in Palestine and burn Gezer? Simeon didn't, as far as I know, campaign in Palestine and burn Gezer. That was Merneptah. Merneptah conquers Gezer. Simeon doesn't. We do have that idea that in the Bible that Pharaoh took it back, but you know, being a weak king is not necessarily doesn't preclude him from doing, say, a small campaign anyway. So how he got there, I'd have to do some more research. We don't have any. Unfortunately, we don't have any inscriptions from the last days of that dynasty. I wish we did, because it would clarify a lot of things. You know, well, the extent of those campaigns, how far he went. So there is a lot of issues there that could really be resolved by more. Now I'm just going to take a quick look at my chronology here to make sure I'm on the right dynasty here. Yes, it is Dynasty 21. So again, if he's coming out, if Simeon is coming out to secure Gezer, to give it as a sort of a bride price, dowry price for a Solomon, you know, he's got to be in tough shape. You know, it's got to be a very, very tough shape. And we do know from the particular time period, okay? So if we just look at, say, Solomon's dates, and we can very, very easily compare them, you know, to the reigns of Sisenes the second and Simeon the first, we know that that dynasty is just crumbling. It's falling apart. And it's falling apart from the inside. It's not able to hang on to things. So if Simeon or Sisenes II went out and conquered Gezer, well, okay. Whether or not he burned it to the ground, that's a whole different question. We don't know that he actually burned it to the ground. So but the biblical text says he took Gezer. So I don't think there's really enough there to really sort of know what happened. So we're going to have to plead some ignorance here until either some more archaeological data comes up or if we find some texts. But it is a great question. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the super chat. Okay. Matthew Harrell for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. Please explain to me, like I'm 5, how Genesis is intertextual with Egyptian and Mesopotamian myths since they spoke different languages. Okay. Well, like your 5. Okay. You asked for it, like your 5. A lot of people learn more than one language. Okay. Polyglots were not exactly uncommon in the ancient Near East. Nor were translations. If you know 2 languages, you can translate one language into another. And scribes, these were people who were professional writers in the ancient Near East, had the ability, because they knew more than one language, that they could translate one text into another. And they were trained to do this. They were trained to do this in Egypt. It appears that they were trained to do this in the Levant, which is the area that we know as Canaan up to Syria. So there became texts, were passed around. Just like, say, you rent loan a book from a paperback from the library, you take it home, and you make a copy of it, of say, you know, a couple pages that you really, really liked. Okay? And then you return the book. Okay? But you still have your copy. And let's say you like it so much, but you want to share it with your friend who speaks French. Okay? You translate that passage into French because you know English and French. Now, you have a piece of the book, and now your French friend has a piece of the book. Okay? This is how texts get transmitted in the ancient Near East. You know, people who spoke Egyptian also spoke in or spoke and read and wrote in other languages like Akkadian. So they could take some Egyptian texts, translate pieces of them into Akkadian, and then from Akkadian, it was a very simple process to translate them, say, into Hebrew. Or they translated directly into a Canaanite dialect that's very easily then translated into Hebrew. So that's how that intertextuality worked, was essentially through translation. And we do see that things were translated between various languages. You know, the Elephantine papyri. We do find that there are, say, certain, you know, Egyptian texts that were translated from, say, Egyptian into Aramaic. Likewise, it's very likely that the reverse happened too. So this was not uncommon in the ancient Near East. People shared texts, particularly texts that they really, really thought were poignant or important or somehow had meaning for them. You know, just like we do today. So that's how you start to get intertextuality, is you see that one person will deem a text important and translate it into another language. So, and again, I think that the whole idea that people just spoke one language in you know, that cultures in the ancient Near East were essentially unilingual, I think that there's something wrong with that anyway. I think there's something wrong with that because, say, outside of North America, we're essentially unilingual, except for, say, French Canada. Most countries are multilingual. Multilingual is the rule, not the exception. So we should find then that, or at least expect that, you know, even back in the ancient Near East, that there were people who were multilingual. At least some of them were, and especially the literate class. You know, we find this even in say the Roman period. You know, a person wasn't considered really literate unless he knew Greek and Latin. That's what it took to be literate, was to know both. Even though Greece was a conquered territory, it was a subservient conquered territory by the Roman period. And yet, the culture of the language defined literacy in ancient Rome. So I think it's not unreasonable. I mean, in say, for example, first century Palestine, you know, there were half dozen languages floating around. You know, of course, you had Aramaic, you had Hebrew, you had Greek, but yeah, some other minor languages too, like Edomite floating around as well. You know, so there were other things that were going on, you know, that people brought into the mix as they moved around and conversed with others. So I hope that explains it, like you're a 5-year-old. Thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that explained it, and I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much. Okay, Mouthwash. Hi, Mouthwash. 15 Israeli shekels. Thank you very much. What are important outstanding problems or inconsistency with our knowledge of Egypt or the ancient Near East, like chronologies or political events? Political events are kind of odd because we only kind of get blips in the radar, as it were. Chronologies are a little different. There, we do find some inconsistencies in chronologies. Now, with that, I'm going to very, very much caveat that. I would say the problem is not so much, say, the chronologies as we know it, say, from the secular chronologies that we construct today. Like, modern chronology is very good. It's very accurate. It's based upon many, many records and many, many synchronisms. You know, we're dealing with at least 150, 200 synchronisms that define modern chronology. Now, the consistency of modern chronology with, say, what people tend to reconstruct from biblical chronology has some problems, and I think we got to be very, very blunt about that. One of the issues is, say, the age of the patriarchs. That is an issue, and we have to be very blunt about that. The age of the patriarchs, as recorded in the book of Genesis, is somehow inflated, and we don't exactly quite know how. Now, interestingly enough, the chronology all works out if one only reduces, say, the chronology of Jacob. You know, you can reduce Jacob's age from, if you reduced it from, say, 147 years down to, say, 87-ish, it suddenly all works out. So there is an inconsistency there. Now, we don't know exactly why those particular ages were used. And even so, we kind of have to wonder what's going on with Jacob's particular age too, because Jacob, unlike, say, the other patriarchs, like, say, Isaac's, could easily be, say, the lineage of a clan. That could easily be the lineage of the clan, just because there's so little we have to go on for Isaac. But in the case of Jacob, where we are dealing with, say, a very eventful life. So there's going to be something, there is some sort of idiosyncrasy going on with the age of the patriarchs there. So with that said, that's probably the biggest sort of issue we have, say, with the inconsistencies with our knowledge of the ancient Near East and, say, the biblical record. And again, the whole issue of numbers in the Old Testament is something that biblical scholars do struggle with. We do know that they're using numbers in a way that we don't exactly understand yet. Okay, and it's not necessarily that it's de facto inconsistent. It's that we don't get it. We're not part of that world. We're not part of that context. And we do know that other ancient Near Eastern cultures did this much the same thing. You know, we know that Babylonian cultures did this from time to time, where they had exceptionally inflated ages. And we don't know why. We don't know what the understanding there was, why they did it, or what justified it. So we are dealing here with a series of unknowns. Now, we're getting there. You go back, say, 100 years, people would have taken 40 literally every time. Every time that would have been read as a literal 40 number. Today, we've got enough textual examples that we can actually show that 40 isn't always used as a literal number. Sometimes it's an idiomatic expression. We're still in that sort of early stage of the research on this, where we're still trying to figure out exactly how numbers work, and it's one of those puzzles that scholars are still trying to figure out. But that is also a crossover thing with many other things that we find in the Bible as well. So it doesn't just apply to, say, the ages of the patriarchs or chronology. It applies to, say, the numbers of people who are in the census. So numbers are an ongoing issue in in Pentateuchal studies. So, but with that said, too, say broader historical events are not as given to inconsistencies as sort of the fine details of numerical count. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. We've got another super chat from Matthew Harrell. Thank you very much for $4.99. I read some Babylonian wisdom and am wondering if the suffering servant is connected with Job. When do you think Job was written, and am I mistaken? Wow, you're starting here to get into what's sometimes called in biblical studies archetypes. You know, archetypes are basically a past person or figure that is used as an expression of a later person. Job as a suffering servant is often described as an archetype of Christ, somebody who suffered, you know. So that's actually quite a common motif that you see in, say, biblical studies. So I think now is there a direct connection there? Yeah, I think there's some direct connection there. Now that your second question, when do you think Job was written, and am I mistaken? I think Job dates at least no earlier than the early Iron Age. So I think we're already into the time of the Israelite kings when Job was written, and I think there's enough internal evidence to make that case. Now, later Babylonian, there is some Babylonian influence in Job, but it's also we're also told too that Job lived among the Arameans, so we would expect some Mesopotamian influence there. So that shouldn't actually surprise us that we find some Mesopotamian or Babylonian or Assyrian influence, Old Assyrian anyway, Old Assyrian influence in Job. So that shouldn't actually surprise us because he's contemporary and geographically situated with a lot of these figures, a lot of these cultures. So that shouldn't surprise us too much. Now, whether that's Neo-Babylonian, and the suggestion is that it's being written after the Babylonian exile, I don't know. I'm a little skeptical about that. It's probably not completely impossible, but again, I'm skeptical about that. I think nothing rules out an Iron Age, early Iron Age writing for Job, but I think it's definitely no earlier than early Iron Age 1. So with that said, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Besides Labib Habashi and Zahi Hawass, do you know any other Egyptologists from Egypt? Egyptologists from Egypt. Yes, I do, but I'd have to go into my Rolodex. It's been a while. Well, yeah, there's actually James Hoffmeyer. He was actually born in Egypt. Yeah, you're right. James Hoffmeyer was actually born in Egypt. He's pretty much spent the first 10 or 13 years of his life there. So if that qualifies, yeah, he was definitely from Egypt. So but there are some others, and I do know some, again, but I don't contact them all the time. So it's one of those things where I kind of have to open my Rolodex and look at the cards. So but there are some good ones. Salima Ikram is probably one of the most famous. Salima Ikram, she's extremely famous for what's it called now? Animal mummies. She did all these animal mummies from Valley of the Kings. She's probably one of the most famous Egyptologists alive today, and she's an Egyptian. So there are some, and there are some that are very, very good at what they do. So there's also two kinds of Egyptologists too, and we have to kind of be cognizant of this as well. You get the Egyptologists that study abroad, get their education from foreign schools, and then go back to Egypt. Those ones are exceptionally well trained, exceptionally talented, very, very good at what they do. There's also a kind of Egyptologist that studies within Egypt, and they become more like tourist, essentially arms for the Ministry of Tourism. Okay, shills for the Ministry of Tourism. Most of those are trained in tourism and hospitality, not exactly archaeology. So you get a lot of those too, and you see a lot of them supervising antiquity sites. So there are two calibers of Egyptologists. One that's really, really good and really very, very competent, and the other that's really just more or less a mouthpiece for the Egyptian Board of Tourism. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much. Very much appreciated. Okay, Dante's Powers. All right. Yeah, obviously I'm just going to put that in. Just going to thank him first. Thank you for the super chat for 15 Israeli shekels, and I will get to that question. It seems Egyptians have... Yeah, I see it. Got it. All right. Question from Dante's Powers. It seems Egyptians had a strong belief in magic. Yes, they did. Besides court tales, are there first-hand accounts of Egyptians claiming to witness magic the way people in the Bible claim to witness miracles? Ooh. Now, that is a fine question. Witnessing magic, not so much. Because there's almost an assumption that magic is real. They don't have to actually witness it. They just more or less assume it. But what we do also find is a lot of evidence of magic spells in Egypt. A lot of it. And what I mean by that is that we find fragments of ostraca and papyri that have written on it spells. Later on, you'll even see these amulets that were made of pounded lead, which had inscriptions on it, and the lead was folded up and turned into a magic amulet. The execration texts, which are basically curses that are put on these little figurines, and then the figurines were smashed, is a kind of magic spell. You find there's a papyrus that has a spell for the protection of a child after childbirth. There's a lot of magic in Egypt, a lot of it, and it's just ingrained, absolutely ingrained in the culture. So you find it everywhere. So you don't see a lot of people claiming it. Now, we also have to understand here what we have is a bit of a survivability problem too. Most of what we see in, say, Egyptian texts are religious texts. They are religious texts that are either written by the upper class or by the king, and they are directed to the gods. So you don't actually find a lot of, say, first-person accounts that, say, describe, an eyewitness account. That kind of genre is very rare in Egypt, just because those sort of texts don't survive well. They tend to be on papyrus, and papyrus, unless it's in the ideal place, tends to rot away. So you don't see a lot of those particular kinds of texts. However, you do see there are claims that say miraculous kinds of events happened or unnatural events kind of happened. But at the same time, too, it's hard to tell which of those are just sort of first person account of magic versus kind of reception history where people saw something they couldn't understand and tried to explain it in a way they did. So it's difficult, and we again don't quite have enough data to really sort of confirm this. We do see people practicing magic all the time. That's very common. You know, wax models are often used in magical ceremonies in Egypt. So people are doing magic left, right, and center in Egypt. Did they claim to see it or that it worked? That's kind of hard to say. But thank you very much for your question. It's an interesting question. Okay. Determined Sheepy for $10. Thank you very much. No questions, just gotta say you handled David Roll's fantasy novel most enjoyably. Everyone should rewatch. Well, I'm glad you appreciated it. Not everyone quite appreciated it the way you did, but I'm glad it went off. Most people found it edifying and at least somewhat enjoyable. And yeah, I have to admit, it did. There was a large amount of fantasy novel going on there. But he's a raconteur. That's what he does. He tells stories. And he tells them well, which is why people believe it. People love the stories. And it's why he has a very, very large following. And it's why he keeps getting invited to churches to speak, is because people love the stories. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Matthew Harrell for $4.99 again. Thank you very much. Will you please recommend some books for Egyptian law, magic, and wisdom like you did last weekend, particularly if it helps me understand scripture context? Okay. For scripture context, if you want a sort of wide base here, I would recommend Context of Scripture. It's, I think, 4 volumes now. That was edited by William Hallow and Lawson Younger. That has a wide variety of different texts that are applicable in some way to the reading of Scripture. Some are tangential, some of them are, really, really important. But it's a very, very good collection. It's all in translation, so you don't have to know the original languages. So that's probably that's a really, really great resource if you want to have, say, a sort of a collection of texts that you can go back and read for yourself. Now, for your books on Egyptian law, magic, and wisdom. Wisdom, we don't quite have a really good one yet. You can go to the anthologies like 8 and William Kelly Simpson's Ancient Egyptian Literature. That has many, that particular anthology has many Egyptian wisdom texts in it, such as the admonitions of Ipuwer, Amenemope. I think maybe even Nefertiti's in there, but I'm not sure. So there's a lot of good wisdom literature in that anthology. As far as law, there's no good books on law. The reason why is because there wasn't much law. Egypt was not a society governed by law. It was a society governed by order. Okay? So the first law that was ever sort of written in Egypt was a anti-corruption edict by Horemheb. So you have to understand that it's already at the at the end of Dynasty 18 when Egypt gets its first law code. You know, its first law. And it only had to do with corruption by officials, unfair weights, that sort of thing. So that's the first example of law we find in Egypt. Essentially, Egypt was ruled by just two guiding principles, essentially, which is that any offense against the king is a death penalty offense. So you steal a toothpick from the king, you lose your head. You get killed for that, because that's a death penalty offense. Okay. Anything else is a civil matter that's determined by the temples or the courts. So justice in Egypt tended to be slow, monotonous. We have records of people, like people back then would rent a donkey the same way we'd rent cars today. And people would have to sign contracts to rent a donkey. And amongst these contracts were things like you promise not to take this donkey to Babylon, which is kind of the same way, like, don't take your automobile to Mexico. Okay. Now, in some cases, people would rent that donkey and the donkey would die by natural causes or through mistreatment. Well, the civil law basically said that the guy who rented it was liable for the death of the donkey. Well, collecting on that liability was very, very difficult in Egypt. We have records of people going to court 5, 6 times to try to get paid compensation for the death of their donkey. The problem with judgments in ancient Egypt is they had no teeth. So the guy would get a judgment, go to the guy to collect, and the guy would just say, I don't have to pay it. Guy would go back to court, get another judgment, come back, and the cycle would continue. So there wasn't actually a lot of law in Egypt, but there was a lot of order. Okay. You just did not mess with the king. The king was not someone you messed with. So Egypt, being an orderly society, could maintain civil order without laws. So you're not going to find many books on Egyptian law because there just isn't much Egyptian law. Magic, on the other hand, I can recommend a really good book by Robert Rittner, who just passed away this year. He wasn't all that old either. He was like 67. He just passed away. Robert Rittner wrote probably the definitive volume on Egyptian magic, and it came out in 4 editions. The 4th one is excellent. Even the first one's good. Okay, but that is the best book on Egyptian magic. Now there was one other. What was her name? Cannot remember her name. There was one other book on Egyptian magic that is quite good. It's just not terrific. Yeah, she didn't footnote anything, so it can be very frustrating to read her book because should I ever remember her name?
When you think about it.
Yeah, when I think about this at 3 a.m. in the morning, it'll come to me that what her name was. But there was another book on Egyptian magic that was very good, but it was badly footnoted. So she would talk about things, and you'd look them up, and you couldn't find them after because she didn't footnote properly. But Rittner's book is the best, bar none. There has not been another book on Egyptian magic that's even come close to Rittner's. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Okay. Another super chat from Matthew Harrell for $4.99. You once said there was no connection between Satan and Baal. What should we make of Christ calling Beelzebub Satan once again? Like on 5, please. I'd have to look up that reference. Let's see if I can find this quickly. Not Beelzebub in this. All right. I'm trying to find the passage where that appears. Gospels. And there's not a lot in there. Let's see. Okay. We have Matthew 10:25, which says, it is enough for the disciple that he has become as his teacher and the slave his master. If they have called the head of the house Beelzebub, how much more the members of his household? We got Matthew 12, where the Pharisees heard, they said, this man casts out demons only by Beelzebub, ruler of the demons. And then 26, and I think this is the passage you're talking about here. Matthew 12:26-27. And if Satan casts out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then shall his kingdom stand? And if by Beelzebub casts out demons, by whom shall do your sons cast them out? Consequently, they shall be your judges. Okay. So essentially what's happening is that the Pharisees here are taking the old storm god Baal, Beelzebub, okay, which was forget what that was called, Lord of I forget what Zebub was, but it was Lord of something. Now the Israelite, the Pharisees, changed the name Beelzebub to Beelzebub, which means Lord, essentially Lord of the Flies. It's a derogatory name. The connection here between sort of Satan and Baal, the storm god Baal, is sort of really sort of a tangential one. Okay, it's not a direct connection. Part of it comes from the fact that in the Old Testament, the storm god Baal was seen as the great rival deity to Yahweh. Okay. So you did have this line in, say, Pharisaic and Babylonian teaching that that Baal was essentially more or less a placeholder of the great enemy, the Hashatan, the adversary. Okay, so there isn't a connection between them mythologically. But later on, what happens is the two identities sort of coalesce. So while historically there isn't a connection between Baal and Satan, because Baal is essentially just a storm god. He's a storm god that stands on the back of a bull, throwing lightning bolts. That's what he does. He's a storm god. Satan, but he does come to us in, say, the during the time of the prophets and even the judges as being, say, the great competitive god to Yahweh. And that much is absolutely true. He was seen as a competitor in, say, the Old Testament. Now, whether or not that's connected to Satan is a whole different matter, because we also see that the history of Satan in the Old Testament seems to sort of just spring into the time of the prophets. Not so, we don't see it back into even the time of, say, the judges. It's during the time of the prophets where we see the first sort of inklings of Satan as sort of a named entity. Now, this is not to say that he didn't exist prior and he wasn't behind Baal per se, or any of the counterfeit gods, but this is to say that from, say, the textual record, there does not seem to be a direct connection. Now, what we have here in, say, Matthew 12 is an indirect connection. So the Pharisees are basically accusing Christ, saying, this man casts out demons only by Beelzebub, the ruler of the demons. Okay. What does Christ do here? He ups the ante. He ups the ante. Now, we have to understand in sort of Pharisaic demonology that Beelzebub was, say, the lower of the two. Satan and Beelzebub were not synonymous in Pharisaic demonology. You actually had Baal below Satan in Pharisaic demonology. So what does Christ do? Verse 26. He ups the ante. He's, well, why talk about Beelzebub? Let's go right for Satan here. Let's go right to the top. And if Satan casts out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then shall his kingdom stand? And if I, by Beelzebub, cast out demons, who do your sons cast out demons? Consequently, they shall be your judges. Okay? So he's not actually saying here that the two are the same, except sort of by indirect reference. What he is saying is that if you're going to say that I'm casting out demons by this lackey ruler of the demons, then let's go right for the top. If he can do that, Satan can do that. If Satan can do that, what is the basis for your sons casting out demons? So he's turning the tables by upping the ante. So that's what's going on here. It's not a direct comparison. Now, there might be another passage that I'm missing that does make that direct comparison, but that's the one I found. So let me just do a quick scan here just to make sure I haven't missed something. Yeah, that seems to be the primary link there, is that casting out demons episode. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for your super chat. Very much appreciated. Muhammad Karam for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Have you ever thought of putting the Seder Olam chronology in the Groundhog Lab? I have their issues here with the Seder Olam chronology. It's not really a true chronology. The other thing is it's actually a debate. So the question is going to ultimately boil down to which side of the debate do you side with? Okay. So that's going to be very, very problematic when you've got, say, a back and forth between two sages. Is which one do you pick? Because there's two competing views in the Seder Olam. So for those who don't know, the Seder Olam is part of the Babylonian Talmud. It was committed to writing about 500 AD, and it's a collection of Jewish, biblical, and extra biblical traditions and mythologies. So what you often find in Talmudic tradition, and what makes Talmudic tradition so difficult for people to engage, is you've got this really weird mix of both debate between various sages, combined with more or less abbreviated entries. So not a lot is well fleshed out. So when we talk about, say, in the Seder Olam, when it talks about, say, the Jubilee years, it's often misread. It's often misread because the way the tradition is recorded is vague. It's meant to be vague. These were people who were really hedging their bets on the tradition just to make sure that they didn't mess it up. So, because there's a vagueness there, because there's a lot of, say, opportunity for, say, further embellishment, and you do find this where the Seder Olam is also augmented by later writers to flesh out the details. And sometimes they do that just even by flipping the original meaning on its head. So it's going to boil down to which interpretation, which version, and even then, do you still have a coherent tradition underneath that all? So I can think of other things I'd rather do with Groundhog right now that do not include the Seder Olam. I think one of the things I'd much rather do right now is do the Babylonian what's it called now? There's a scribal year thing that happens in Babylonian texts where every year is given the name of a certain official, and that official is correlated to specific calendar years. So I think getting that into Groundhog would be much more beneficial. There's also some other minor kingdoms too I'd love to include as well. So, and I'd also love to expand it more towards, say, more the Hellenistic period as well. So there's things here that I'd really love to add to if I had the time. I just haven't had the time. I'd also love to give the code a good cleaning as well. It could use some abstraction simplification, and essentially, I'd love to make an edition that didn't require as much hardware to use. So there's a lot of work that can be done here. It all boils down to time, and I don't have a lot of time for that right now. But I still use it. I still use it a lot. I actually just used it frequently to do some work with the chronologies of patriarchs, with the recent synchronisms we found with Amraphel and Zimri Lim, and that was very interesting. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it.
Geraldine Pinch.
Geraldine Pinch, that was the name of it. Yeah.
You want me to say thank you?
Yeah. Yeah, that was the book. That was the book on magic I was looking for earlier. Yeah, it was Geraldine Pinch. Yeah, she it was an odd book for her to write anyway. You know, you do find these books normally books like this come out at the end of a career, where you're done sort of your scholarly career and you're just sort of getting out those last few books. You know, and they're not always well cited because, you know, you just can't be bothered to look up where you originally remembered it from, or you can't remember, but you know the material so well that it doesn't matter that you can't cite it because you know it so well. So these a lot of books right before a scholar will retire will have very few footnotes, few if any footnotes. So, but it's usually the last book you do in a career. You know, Geraldine Pinch, on the other hand, wrote this book on Egyptian magic at the beginning of her career. So when it came out, a lot of Egyptologists were going, "What's up with this? Aren't you just starting out? Why is there no citations? Well, the reason is because she doesn't like doing citations. So it was very frustrating because it otherwise would have been an excellent resource. So while it's a good read, and I think it's very informative, it's very difficult to go back and try to take stuff out of it. So I don't recommend Geraldine Pinch's book, but I know it's it's one of the better. I prefer Rittner's book. Rittner's book is just so much better. But at the same time, too, Geraldine Pinch's book also covers some subject matter topics that Ritter doesn't cover either. So, you know, take the two books together and you've got pretty much a good overall survey of magic in ancient Egypt. Right, thank you very much for that comment. That was very helpful. Okay. Gizgo SBOL for $2. Thank you very much. Could Yehud Melech on Shishak's portal be Judah? Yes, it could be. It could be the king of Judah. That is the problem, though. Here is that the Melech's in the wrong place. You do need the Melech to be in front for it to be that, to be the king of Judah. Now, what we know from the Babastite portal, which is the portal at Karnak Temple where Shishak the First carved his inscriptions, there's some issues with that, with the toponyms there. It is a badly damaged wall. There's a lot of the captive circles that are destroyed. So we're not going to get a complete record of this, which is unfortunate because that was it's a very important inscription for us. Now, from what did survive, we do know that Shishak traveled up to along the coastal plain up to the Jezreel Valley, and then moved south. And he moved south as far as Gibeon. Now, you have to understand that Gibeon is right on Jerusalem's doorstep. It's right there. It's still technically in the tribe of Benjamin, but the tribe of Benjamin is already in the kingdom of Judah. Because if we remember our history right, we know that when the 12 tribes split, 10 tribes went off and did their thing, but the tribe of Benjamin joined up with the tribe of Judah. So it's really the kingdom of Judah and Benjamin. So Shishak makes it at least to Gibeon. And then he sort of turns west. If you look at the names that sort of survived, he goes to Kirath Jearim. And then he goes to Ajalon. So he makes a straight beeline south until he hits Gibeon. Then he goes kind of west and turns back up again. So I do think that the evidence, if we chart his course, is more than enough to say that, you know, he at least approached. I mean, he came from what we have. He came very close to Jerusalem. So he was on their doorstep. Now, we have to remember, too, that there's actually nothing in the Egyptian or, say, the biblical texts that said that Shishak conquered either Jerusalem or even laid siege to it. All we're told is that he came up against it. What does that exactly mean? Was he on the way? Was he knocking on the front door? Was he inside the gate? Well, what I think happened here is that he was on the way. And essentially what Rehoboam did was he basically took all the major treasures that could have been looted. He left a few behind, but most of them. He took everything that would have been desirable for Shishak and just said, here, take the gold, take the silver. There's nothing more here for you to loot. Go away. Leave us in peace. And I think Shishak the First saw the size of the hall, and basically said, "Yeah, you're right. There's probably nothing left there, and just not worth my time." Turned around and sort of, started making his way back. So I do think there's more than enough evidence to suggest that Shishak the First did actually, do the described. But could Yehud Melech be Judah? Maybe, maybe not. It would be something that I think is, it could be. Yeah, it could be. But what does that exactly mean? And is it just, say, City of Judah's king, or is it the king of Judah? It's in the wrong order for it to be the king of Judah. So it could also be just the city of the king, or city of Judah. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much, and thank you for the super chat. Okay. Kwame Adu 007 for $5. Thank you very much. Dr. Falk, do you think that Genesis 1 to 5 has more of an Egyptian influence or Mesopotamia? What connections are between Egypt and Mesotexts and Genesis? That's hard to say, because we find both influences there. Okay, there is definitely some Mesopotamian influence. There's also some Egyptian influence there. So, determining then which one has more, exceptionally difficult. We find mythologies from both Egypt and Mesopotamia being referenced, and in generic ways, and sometimes in not so generic ways. Okay, the whole idea of the Shemesh, the sun, God creating the sun, God creating the land. These are motifs we do find in Mesopotamian, but we also find too that the god speaking out of his mouth is something that seems to also parallel certain Egyptian divinities as well, such as the god Ptah, who is a creator deity. So at the same time too, we do find both influences there. It's hard to say exactly which one has more influence. And to be honest, too, some of this has to go, we have to admit, it has to go all the way back to Eden as well. The Eden might be an influence that, it just is sort of confirmed in the culture as it's passed down. The Edenic sort of, the cherubim and the temple and all that of the created order is maybe something that's just passed down from generation to generation to generation, agrees with Mesopotamia or agrees with Egypt, and is just sort of then sort of co-opted into one, and then comes back into Genesis 1 to 11. So I definitely think there's influence, and I think there's influence from both nations in here. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Okay, Moises Salazar for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Dr. Falk, I hope that was what you were trying to write. What is your opinion on finding of tobacco and cocaine traces in Egyptian mummies? All right. What do I think? I think this is the evidence of 19th century archaeologists who got a little sloppy with their drugs. Now, we have to kind of understand that British archaeologists love their tobacco, but tobacco is a plant that's native to the Americas. It's not native to Europe, and it's not native to Africa. Same thing with cocaine. Coca leaves are a import from the New World. Okay, so it was not uncommon for British aristocracy on many Egyptian, or sorry, not Egyptian, English, British archaeologists were from the aristocracy. Cocaine addiction, we have to recognize, was very, very common in, say, 19th century England. And many of those archaeologists would have brought their bad habits with them when they came to excavate in Egypt. So, with that said, it would not be beyond question that, you know, you have an archaeologist who's smoking a pipe for tobacco, or, you know, letting the cocaine, you know, fly free from a gust of wind or something, you know, as they are doing their work. We also have to understand too that, you know, these people would apply things to their archaeology from time to time, which would not be considered to be best practices today. Jim Hoffmeyer tells me the story. He's working with this archaeologist, and I will omit the name to preserve his reputation. But they dig up a stela in Egypt. You know, sun's beating down on the stela, and you know they dust it off, and they can't read a thing. And the old archaeologist says to Hoffmeyer, "You know how we read a stela like this?" And Jim goes, you know, Hoffmeyer goes, "No, how do we read this?" And he's probably still a grad student at this time. Well, this old archaeologist pulls out a cup of tea and starts pouring it on the stela to wet the stela to be able to read it. Well, you know, pouring tea on an Egyptian artifact today wouldn't fly. It just wouldn't fly. So, because you've now contaminated the artifact with a foreign substance. So, people did things to artifacts way back in the late 19th and 20th centuries that would not exactly, you know, would not exactly be considered best practices today. So I don't think the ancient Egyptians had tobacco or cocaine, and I don't think they had tea. But I do think that archaeology is one of those disciplines that does leave a trace. Okay, it leaves traces behind. You know, archaeology is an inherently destructive discipline. Okay, you can only excavate a site cleanly once, and after that, then it's rescue archaeology. It's recovery archaeology. So when you dig a site, you're leaving a hole. Essentially, you're destroying the context, you're digging everything up. But also too, people leave things behind. You know, and those can create anachronisms and problems. Whether it's tobacco ash, whether it's pieces of a turkey sandwich. You know, you could do a DNA survey on probably some of these mummies too and find turkey DNA. Well, you know, you're not likely to you don't have turkeys in before the discovery of the New World. So the Egyptians didn't have turkeys either. So we do leave a trace whenever we do dig. And you know, so that's I think it wasn't very cautious of those excavators to just publish that and suggest that Egyptian mummies, ancient Egyptians were using tobacco and cocaine. Because I think the source of that was pretty evident. Okay, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, are we at the end of... Oh, nope, still. Thoughts on the identity of Zerah the Cushite? Let's have a look here for Zerah the Cushite. Thank you very much for that super chat for $2. Let's see. Zerah. There are a lot of people named Zerah. It would help if you, when you ask questions with a biblical reference, to at least give me sort of some indication where it's found. Okay, I found it here. Zerah the Ethiopian came out against the army. Let me see if that's Zerah. Okay, I see it. 2 Chronicles 14. Now, verse 8. Now, Asa had an army of 300,000 from Judah, bearing large shields and spears, and 280,000 from Benjamin, bearing shields and wielding bows. All of them were valiant warriors. Zerah the Ethiopian, Serah. The Ethiopian came out against them with an army of 1,000,000 men and chariots, and he came out to Massa, and so Asa went out to meet him, and they drew battle formation in the battle of Zeph at Marah. Okay, now let me look up the chronology of that. So Asa is 910 to 869. Okay. 869, 69 is 910 to, who is it? The other one, it was Judah, Benjamin. Okay, so this is the King Asa. All right, and okay, so it will be one of the things. I see, okay. Okay, I know who that is now. All right, that's probably Osorkon. It's one of the Osorkons. Either Osorkon the first or Osorkon the second. I'd have to probably look that up to see which one it is. So Zerah here would probably be one of the Osorkons. So that's probably what we have here. Now, I'd have to look that up and do a little more to get the exact year. We can, to sort of narrow down which one it is. So it's either Osorkon the first or Osorkon the second. The two are very, very close to each other. So it would take a little more research to sort of figure out which one of them, of the Osorkons, it is. But I think it's just because of the dating of Asa, we can definitely place that in Dynasty 22. So apart from that, I'll have to just say that I need to do a little more research on that. But it's something I am going to be doing a series on Egyptian pharaohs that we find in, say, the Bible. So this is one we can definitely add to the list. He's in all likelihood one of the 30 intermediate kings. but we'll have to see which one it is exactly. So that's the best I can do right now for this, but I appreciate the question and appreciate the super chat. Thank you very much. Okay. Saahi Heather Newt for $2. Thank you very much. Thanks for catching my attention with the title. Okay. Fear of the number 13, huh? Well, welcome to our 13th live stream. I'm glad you enjoyed the title. I'm glad somebody did. You know, making up titles for these live streams is really sort of a funky endeavor because, you know, I try to tie these into to the ancient Near East, but you know, you can't do it for all of the numbers. So I end up having to do like cultural references. But in this particular case, the name of the phobia for the number 13 just seemed appropriate. So, but I thank you very much for that super chat, and I'm glad you enjoyed that. Okay, Ryan Naylor for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good undergrad schools for budding scholars. Ooh. Sun seems drawn to Assyriology, but that is more of graduate level. University of Chicago or Wheaton. Okay, at this point, not Wheaton. Wheaton has pretty much closed its archaeology program. Okay. Let's see here. Good undergraduate students for budding scholars. And that's going to really, really depend upon what your son wants to do. There are some good ones. There are some actually excellent ones. Generally speaking, most of you're not going to find a lot of undergrad programs in archaeology, but you will find some. And they're generally pretty good across the board, so you can't really go wrong with the undergrad programs. And Chicago's a great place for an undergrad program in archaeology. So who else would be good? I know UCLA has a good program, undergrad program. Memphis, University of Memphis, probably has an excellent undergrad program in archaeology. So what will generally happen is people will do, say, an undergrad program in, say, archaeology, but you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be, it can also be in a related discipline as well. So most of the training for Assyriology is done at the graduate level. Okay, so you really can't do Assyriology at the undergrad level. There's just too much information that's needed to prime you to be able to do that, to prepare you for it. So Assyriology is always done at the graduate level. Now, with that said, if there might be a school out there that teaches, say, Akkadian, which is the foundation language for Assyriology. Chicago probably does. I believe I don't know if UCLA does, and I don't know if Memphis does. I know Toronto used to. I don't think they do anymore. So your son is going to have to sort of do a archaeology, and sometimes anthropology will suffice here too. Do their undergrad degree first, and then sort of pick a graduate school, because graduate schools are where this work is really taught. It's just the matter of you have to get those foundations, those fundamentals under your belt before you can really go on. Now, I know that, say, British schools will also, say, teach this, but I also understand that could be really expensive as well. So I don't have more advice to give you, say, at the undergrad level. but I know that, say, British schools do teach a lot of this stuff at the undergrad level. So, but undergrad level, you're kind of, it's a lot more, say, generic teaching of say fundamentals of archaeology at that point, and basic history. Okay, so I hope that helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Okay, Matthew Harrell for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. My last question for this week is, I heard that atheists compare Serapis with Jesus and say Jesus was made up. Well, they'll say, the mythicists will say that about anything, you know. The credulity of the mythicists here really leaves a lot to be desired, you know, and it's very, very strange because, say, consensus historians, you know, I mean, with the exception, I mean, Richard Carrier aside, and he's not a consensus historian, he's on the fringe. He's on the fringe. Will assume that you know, these mythicists basically, so if it's a myth, it has to have been made up. And fundamentally, that's a false dichotomy. It's a black and white fallacy. You know, just because something is myth doesn't necessarily mean it's made up. That's sort of the fundamental flaw with mythicist thinking, is myth equals made up. And there's actually a spectrum of stuff we find with myth. You know, myth can be everything from made up to a poetic retelling of true events. You know, it's the same sort of mythicist thinking that said that there was no Troy. You know, there was no, you know, city in Anatolia that the Greeks invaded. Well, we know that's not true anymore, that there was a real Troy. You know, Schiaparelli, you know, I think it's Schiaparelli, proved that Troy was a real city. So, you know, there's there is a lot of variance, it's a gradient. It's a gradient. It's not just one or the other. There's a whole sort of set of degrees as to what myth can be. I mean, myth can be anything from, you know, made up from whole cloth to idealized or enhanced figures, you know, based roughly on true events, to, well, they're true events, but, you know, we're also doing reception history as well to incorporate the actions of the gods for these events, to, you know, almost just a poetic retelling. So, you know, there's a large number of options between the two. Now, who was Serapis and where was he written of? Frankly, I'm not up on my Greek mythology here, so I'm not really sure who Serapis is. So I'm going to have to plead ignorance here, because I didn't actually do a lot of Greek and Roman myth. But I'm going to take just a really quick look here to see if I can find out. Okay. That's who Serapis is. Okay, I know what that is. Okay, that's Osiris Apis. Okay. And that's the reason I'm not that familiar with it, is it's a demotic form of that word, and it's essentially sort of the Hellenization of the composite deity of Osiris and Apis. So Apis was a holy bull. It was one of the holy bulls of ancient Egypt. Egypt had a lot of holy cattle, and Osiris is the resurrection deity. Okay, and Apis was believed to be a manifestation of Osiris. So the merging of the two gods as a composite deity was actually, these composite deities were very common in ancient Egypt. So, Serapis is essentially the Greek, the Hellenized name for Osiris Apis. Okay. Now, Osiris Apis is actually written of all over the place in Hellenistic literature. You find it all over the place. So it was a very, very popular myth, popular religion during the Ptolemaic period, and even into the Roman period. It was very, very popular. So we do find actually cults to Osiris Apis across the Mediterranean. It spreads out and moves out all over the place. Now, with that said, the comparison of Jesus with Serapis, I think is kind of crazy. The fact is that Osiris Apis wasn't ever really resurrected in the same way as say Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was raised from the dead. Osiris never really was raised from the dead. He was reassembled from a chopped up corpse and then had enough life energy in him to copulate. But he never came back to life. But but Egyptian myth said that life poured from Osiris. So the death and sort of the dismemberment and the apotheosis, the Osiris becoming more godlike. He was already a god before, but he becomes more godlike in his transformation in the afterlife. Provides a vehicle for a lot of Egyptian myth. So I don't know if that's the vague similarity that the mythicists here are working on, but I think it's pretty darn weak. I don't think you can really claim that Jesus Christ was created from this myth. Yeah, I've got yeah. I don't see a lot of connections here between the two. And frankly, most historians today would say that Jesus was a real person. They're all going to debate, all historians are going to debate whether or not he was actually God. That's a religious question. That's a personal question. That's the sort of question that people of good faith and conscience, can debate about. Was Jesus Christ God incarnate? But almost no credible historians today say that Jesus didn't exist. It's the majority opinion, and the vast majority. I'd almost say consensus opinion at this point. Serious scholars don't really contest that Jesus Christ existed. So, loons like the mythicists and Richard Carrier, they're often left field on this one. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. It kind of helped to know who Serapis was. Yeah, you have to understand I'm really much more of an New Kingdom Egyptologist. I don't dabble much in the Hellenistic period. So, but knowing that was Osiris Apis, okay, now I know exactly who you were talking about. Okay, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, let's see here, where are we? Is there any more? Is that the last one? No, we got a few more here. Is there a repeat here? Here, mouthwash. Okay, that isn't a... Okay, I see mouthwashes here. I'm gonna have to restart this Twitch session here because I'm missing a couple. I'm missing here mouthwashes. How's your new plagues book going? Have a donation. Well, thank you. I can't put your super chat up because I don't see it up here. Oh wait, maybe it's earlier. Ah, there it is. Okay. Mouthwash for 6 Israeli shekels. Thank you very much. Well, haven't had a chance to write on it because we're still trying to get enough money so I can actually do the sabbatical. We've raised about $1,000, and I appreciate all our donors who've donated to it. But that's the one thing about writing books is it takes lots and lots and lots of time. And it's really, really difficult to do this when you have to do a full-time job. So I do very much appreciate the super chat and the donation. Thank you very much. And if you do want to help donate to this book project we're doing on the plagues of Egypt, please see the GoFundMe campaign in the description below. And again, thank you for everyone who's donated to it. Okay. Okay, Kwame do 007 for $5. Thank you very much. Would Genesis 1 to 5 have to be written during the exile to have Mesopotamian influence? No, it wouldn't. We do know that many of the stories, such as Gilgamesh, were circulated across the ancient Near East long before the Babylonian exile. So it would not need to... that it would not be necessary for Genesis 1 to 5 to have that influence. That influence could go all the way back to at least the middle or even the early Bronze Age. So that influence can go much, much earlier than the Babylonian exile. So that's not at all mandatory for that influence to happen. Your second question, couldn't that be chalked up to Amorite influence in Avaris? It could be actually to other influences as well. But yes, Avaris could be a key source of this. We do know that the Hyksos had some diplomatic ties to, say, the first dynasty of Babylon. There was at the scriptorium at Avaris, in the Hyksos Palace, there was a small fragment of a tablet found there that dates to the first dynasty of Babylon. So that is long before the Exodus. So if there's some diplomatic relations between the Hyksos and the Babylonians, then who knows how much other information and documents they exchanged. So absolutely, there is definitely reason to believe that you know, or at least a possibility that there was cultural interchange between the two nations. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, we are already running into overtime and we're still getting through super chats here. Mohammed Karam for $5. Thank you very much. As someone who does not study language in university, I'm restricted to using grammars like Gardner's. Would they be enough to fully learn Egyptian? I would say you at least need get a couple of tutorials on how to do the alphabet. Okay, just to get some basic grammar. To get some basic phonetics. Just to get... You could just use Gardner to get a good understanding. Now, I still use Gardner myself. I really like Gardner's 3rd edition. But I also understand it's really long in the tooth. It does need some updating, especially to reflect the linguistic advances that were discovered by Pulaski. But it's a good grammar. It's actually an excellent grammar. I would highly recommend getting your hands on it. Gardner's grammar is exhaustive. There's a lot of detail in Gardner's grammar. Now, if you have the sort of the tenacity to study all of Gardner's grammar, you would be very, very competent at Egyptian. You could learn Egyptian just from that. With that said, however, you wouldn't have the latest advances either. I generally, for most people, recommend a simpler book for getting sort of your feet wet, which is Collier and Manley's Learning Egyptian Hieroglyphs, second edition. So I think Collier and Manley is actually a really, really good book for starting off Egyptian. It doesn't overwhelm me with detail. It's got some exercises. I think it's just a really good way to begin it. But with that said, you could learn the whole thing just using grammars. You don't actually need to use other works. But it also helps to have somebody at least give you a tutorial on how to do the alphabet. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, mouthwash for 6 Israeli shekels. Could the name Imhotep be equivalent to Joseph? No, not at all. No, they're not in any way related. Hetep is not even close. I mean, it's not even close. It's not close historically. It's not close etymologically. Imhotep, Emhetep. Basically, I am satisfied. Is not in any way related to the name Joseph. So, there's no way you can make the connection here. But a lot of people do, and a lot of people, I think it was Josephus who first suggested this, which is another reason to not trust Josephus on ancient history. But the two are not related. I mean, they're over 1,000 years apart. And there's no etymological connection. But thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, SG for $2. What languages do you know? Do you know Arabic? I do not know Arabic. I know a small amount of Arabic. When I have to go to Egypt, I pick up a little more every time. So I'm not conversant in Arabic, but I can say shakran, afwan, katav, navi. I know some words in Arabic. I can read the Arabic numbers when I'm doing it, paying attention. I can actually read a little bit of Arabic writing, which was really useful for using the trains in Egypt, because the two platforms go in very opposite directions, and if you get on the wrong platform, you can end up where you don't want to end up. So I was able to read enough Arabic to get me to Aswan. So I can read a little bit of Arabic, but I'm nowhere near fluent. I'm nowhere near at even a conversational level. But it's interesting, you know. I had a listened to a conversation between a Coptic man and a Muslim one starry night at Abu Simbel, and you know, the Copt was telling this Muslim about figures in the Old Testament, you know, and he was talking about Navi David or Navi Dawid, you know, sorry, not Navi, Malik David, you know, or Dawid, King David, you know, and he would talk about the Navi, the prophets, you know, and I could actually follow along a fair amount of what this conversation was. But strictly speaking, I don't know Arabic, although I do have picked up, little bits from time to time, stuff like imshi, scram, get lost. That's not polite language, by the way, so I don't recommend it. But you do pick up things. You do pick up things. Please, thank you, that sort of thing. Now, what languages have I studied? French, German, Japanese, Hebrew, Greek, Moabites. There's 4 dialects of Egyptian that I've studied. A few scripts, a little bit of Hittite, Ugaritic, Moabite. So I've got a good smattering of languages there. So those are basically the languages I either work in or read for other reasons, such as entertainment. Japanese was one of those languages I just picked up because I found it really, really interesting. For entertainment purposes, I watch anime. I used to collect Egyptian antiques. So for me, Japanese was a very interesting and very important language for my hobbies. So that's how I learned that. So, what you need to learn a language is really, really have a good, strong interest in it. Know that you're getting something out of it. So I hope that answers the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. RG strategy for $5. Did Psamtik the First encountered in a military campaign the Scythians? I have an old encyclopedia that says his campaign was stopped by them in the Levant. Psamtik the First. Let me take a brief look at his dates. His dates are 664 to 610 BC. So he's the predecessor of Necho II. He's the king that's put on the throne after Taharko is ousted by the Assyrians. Okay, so I'm not sure about the campaign with the Scythians. I'd have to look that up. But I know roughly who he is. He's the first king of the 26th dynasty. He's the king that helps is established. It's sort of a reestablishment of, say, a Libyan rule in Egypt that takes place after, say, the Cushite dynasty is tossed out. So that's a serious puppet regime, and he's the first king of that puppet regime. I actually know a lot more about his successor, which is Necho II, and it's Necho II who comes into contact with Josiah. So it wouldn't surprise me if Psamtik I did some intervention in the Levant, because there was sort of that intervening there, but I can't say exactly what role the Scythians played because I don't know anything about Scythian history. So with that said, I'll have to say, well, thank you very much for the super chat, but that's probably all I can give you right now unless I look it up. Again, we're getting into the late period here, and this is sort of on the periphery of my knowledge of ancient Egypt at this point. As again, I'm a New Kingdom guy. I know the New Kingdom very well, but yes, the further we get away from the New Kingdom, either towards the present or in the past, the more shaky my knowledge gets on this. So, but Necho II, I know fairly well, and I'm going to do a video on Necho II because I think that's a really, really important. That's a turning point in biblical history. It's one of the most important events in biblical history is the death of Josiah. And that comes at the hands of Necho II. Because it precipitates a lot of other things too. So it's It's a really important event, and the placing of Psamtik the First on the throne is the start of it's not just it's influential because it not only changes the dynasty in Egypt, it also sort of begins the beginning of the end of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and this ultimately leads to the ascendancy of Babylon. So there is an important thing there that's going on, but I'm not sure about the Scythian campaign, so I'd have to get back to you on that one. And thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it, and it's good to see you again. Okay, and okay, and we got another one. All right, thoughts on the attempt, Biblical Theta Historica for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thoughts on attempts to move Akhmosa to 1570 by raidating Hyksos King Khayan. Yeah, no, that ain't gonna work. No, that's not gonna work. You're not gonna be able to move Akhmosa to 1570. The problem is the Amarna letters pull it all back up. It's gonna pull it to a later date. You would have to just pack another 20 years into Egyptian history of the early Dynasty 18 to even make that possible. The 1570 date for Akhmosa the First is your high chronology, and the high chronology just cannot be sustained. It's pretty much dead in the water now, and only a few very sort of minor holdouts now still cling to a 1570 date for Akhmosa, and I don't think it has any legs anymore. The Amarna letters have essentially, you know, just demolished that idea that he could go back to 1570. And frankly, nothing you do about redating, even if you redate King Khayan, okay, even if you redate all of the Hyksos kings, you're still going to have that problem in Dynasty 18, which just pulls everything back up. The only, if you manage to say make the dates for Khayan earlier, it isn't going to also make the dates for Akhmosa earlier. What it's going to do is it's going to leave a gap. And what you're going to have to do is fill that gap with the reign of another king. So it doesn't actually work to move it in that way because of the interdependency we have in Dynasty 18 to Assyria and to Babylon. So yeah, that's just isn't going to work. But thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Muhammad Karam for $2. Would the same apply to Akkadian? I mean, believe you mean, can you learn Akkadian from textbooks? Yeah, it's possible. You could take Hunegard's textbook and learn Akkadian. I mean, I learned Akkadian through Hunegard, but I didn't learn it on my own. I actually did a year of Akkadian. I will say this though, Akkadian is a very, very brutal language to learn. The writing system is very, very difficult. I would not recommend learning Akkadian on your own. You could, I mean, theoretically, you could learn almost any language by reading grammars and textbooks. So it's almost possible to do anyway with any language. Competency and doing it efficiently is a whole different matter. Just to be competent in Akkadian and Egyptian takes 3 to 4 years if you've got schooling. Schooling shortens the process. It could easily take you a decade to become proficient at Akkadian if you try to learn it on your own. It's not the most efficient way to do it. So yes, absolutely, it is true you could do it. And Hunegard is probably the best textbook, but it is an unbelievable amount of work and it's very, very difficult. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. And wow, these keep coming. Okay. We are going to have to call it quits soon, regardless of the super chats, just because we're almost at 2 hours here, and I'm exhausted. So, from Hebrews 9 verse 27 and John 3 verse 16, £5. Thank you very much for the super chat. At Dr. Falk, some scholars try to advance that Yahweh was an Edomite god based upon Judges 5 verse 4, Habakkuk verse 3. Is there any attestation to prove it? We do basically, Yahweh as a southern Canaanite god is not an absurd theory. Moses basically brings Yahweh back from his time in Midian. And during the late Bronze Age, Midian wasn't just Saudi Arabia. It also included Edom and the eastern Sinai as well. The expanse of Midian was a lot larger in the Middle Bronze Age. Now, at the end of the late Bronze Age, Midian contracts, and Edom and Midian become separate kingdoms and regions. But during the time of Moses, it was still that sort of one big Midian homeland. So the idea that the Edomites could have worshipped Yahweh isn't absurd. It's not an absurd thought. Let me just take a look at here. Judges chapter 5 verse 4. And Lord, when thou didst go out from Seir, well, yeah, that's Edom. When thou didst march from the field of Edom, the earth quaked, the heavens also dripped, even the clouds dripped with water. Yeah. And then Habakkuk 3 verse 3. God comes from Taman, and the Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. His splendor covers the heavens, and the earth is full of his praise. Yeah, Mount Paran is a place in the Sinai. Taman is a district in Edom. So, yeah, I have to say, we can't say for sure, but it's possible, and it's not an absurd suggestion. That Yahweh was at least worshipped, maybe not an Edomite god, but at least worshipped in Edom. And it's very likely that Yahweh was also worshipped in Midian in general. So all that is possible. All that is possible, and we can't avoid that possibility. Now that does raise some questions of where did they get Yahweh worship from. So there's questions there of how did God reveal himself to, say, the Edomites or the Midianites. There is some suggestion that it might come down through Abraham. That Abraham might have passed it down, and Yahweh worship might have died out in the Israelites, but not in the Edomites. So, and even then, it might have been, worship as in a polytheism or a henotheism. So it's difficult to say because we don't actually have enough details from Edom to really say a whole lot more. I'd like to see some more excavations here that could tell us a bit more about what happened in the archaeological milieu of Edom and Midian, but we just don't have that yet. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Another one from Hebrews 9, verse 7, and John 3:16 for £5. Thank you very much. Dr. Falk, Sarah Japheth advances that the tribe of Ephraim were not in the land of Exodus based on 1 Chronicles 7, verses 20 to 24. 1 Chronicles. Seven, 20 to 24. Okay. And the sons of Ephraim were Shethula and Bered his son, Tahath his son, Eladiah his son, Tahath his son, Zabab his son, Shethula his son, and Ezer and Eliad, whom the men of Gath were born in the land, killed because they came down to take their livestock. Okay. And their father Ephraim mourned many days, and his relatives came to comfort him. Then he went into his wife, and she conceived and bore a son, and he named Beriah because misfortune came upon his house. And his daughter was Shariah, who built lower and upper Beth Horon, also Uz and Shari. Okay. Okay, first 7 Chronicles 7:1 talks about the sons of Issachar. Just trying to get a little context here. The sons of Benjamin in verse 6. And the sons of Ephraim in verse 20. Okay. Now, we have to understand, too, that these are clans. They're not necessarily directly sons. So... yeah, Ephraim would have died in Egypt. So it's not going to be talking here about Ephraim mourning in Palestine to of his dead children. Okay, so when it talks of say about the sons, it's the sons and son. It's sons of the sons. So essentially, these are clans. So First Chronicles is in many ways what's it called now? A chronicle of clan and where people descended from as far as their clans, the posterity of the descent of the clans. Okay. So when it's using Ephraim here, it's using it in sort of two ways at once, okay? So in one way, it's talking about, in verse 20, Ephraim as the progenitor of the clans of Shuthala and Bered and Tahath and Elidah, etc. Okay? And then you're getting here to say, you know, the 7th or 8th generation that's now in Gath. Okay? Now, at that point, Ephraim is no longer alive. He's dead. Okay? But in verse 22, we're told that Ephraim mourns. Okay? And his relatives came to comfort him. But, however, at this point, we pretty much know that generation passed away. So, because there's around 350 years from the time that that Jacob entered into Egypt until the time of the Exodus. And Ephraim was alive at that time. So if this had been Ephraim in the Promised Land, you're looking at a 300 plus year old Ephraim. You know, that's not happening at this point in history, even if you accept, say, the extended lifespans of certain patriarchs. You know, Ephraim cannot be 300 years old at this point. Okay, so Ephraim here in the instance in verse 22 is being used as a placeholder for the fathers of the clans that perished because of the attack by the resident Canaanites. Okay, so it's a little complicated what's going on here, but that's sort of what's happening, is that you've got Ephraim being used two ways. First, as the progenitor of the clans, and then secondly, as a placeholder for the fathers of the people who died. So, yeah, I understand there can be some confusion here, but that seems to be what's going on here. But anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, and we are going to wrap it up here because it's very, very late. Again, I want to take this opportunity to thank all the people who asked great questions tonight, and thank you for all the super chats. Very much appreciate it. Thank you for all our subscribers who really keep this channel going. Thank you for our Patreon supporters, without whom none of this can happen. And I want to thank you for a very lucky 13th live stream. So with that, have a good night, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.